I found out my husband was cheating through a random Spotify playlist. This is one of those stories where, if it hadn't happened to me, I wouldn't believe it. It's weird, modern, and somehow both ridiculous and heartbreaking at the same time. A few weeks ago, my husband Greg and I were planning a weekend getaway. We'd been going through a rough patch, nothing explosive, but the slow kind of drift that happens when two people get stuck in the routine of life. We were both busy with work, and our conversations had started to feel robotic. You know the type, "How was work? Did you pick up the dry cleaning? We're out of eggs." I'd been feeling distant from Greg for a while, but I kept brushing it off as stress. Every couple goes through rough spots, right? I figured a weekend away could help. It wasn't anything fancy, just a little cabin in the woods, no Wi-Fi, just us, nature, and a whole lot of quiet. Greg seemed into it too. He offered to take care of the music for the drive, which was normal for him. Music had always been Greg's thing. He'd make playlists for everything, our Sunday morning breakfasts, when we worked out together, even for cleaning the house. His playlists were one of the things I loved about him, how he could set the mood with just the right songs. So when he said he'd make a special playlist for the trip, I didn't think twice. One night after dinner, I caught him sitting on the couch with his laptop, headphones on, tapping his foot along to whatever he was curating. "You're really taking this playlist seriously, huh?" I teased. He looked up and grinned, pulling one earphone out. "I want it to be perfect for us. Don't worry, I won't make it too sappy." I laughed. "Good. I don't want to cry while I'm driving. Save the emotional ballads for the cabin." He winked and went back to his music, and for the first time in a while, I felt like maybe this weekend was exactly what we needed. The next day, while working from home, I decided to listen to some music. I opened our shared Spotify account and saw a new playlist titled for us. Obviously, I assumed it was the playlist Greg had been working on for the trip. Feeling a little sentimental, I hit play, expecting to hear some of the songs we both loved. Maybe a bit of The National or some Fleetwood Mac, the kind of stuff we bonded over early in our relationship. The first couple of songs were normal, and I smiled, thinking maybe this trip would bring us back to that easy, comfortable place we used to be. But then the third song started playing, and it was one I'd never heard before. It wasn't the unfamiliarity that struck me, it was the lyrics. The chorus went something like, "Nobody has to know / we keep it on the low," and I felt an immediate pit in my stomach. It was the kind of song that was way too specific about sneaking around, and as soon as it played, I felt my breath catch in my throat. I paused the playlist and sat there, staring at the screen. It's probably just a random song, I told myself. He probably added it by accident, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I opened the playlist and scrolled through the rest of the songs. My heart dropped. The titles alone told me something was off. Secret Love, Hidden Heart, She Doesn't Know, and every song had the same theme. Forbidden Romance, Secrets, Affairs. I sat there in silence, just staring at my phone, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Was it a joke? A coincidence? My hands were shaking as I played another song. This one with lyrics about sneaking out in the middle of the night to meet a lover. I was in disbelief. Greg would never, right? But the evidence was right there. I quickly went to his Spotify activity, something I hadn't done in ages. My heart was racing as I looked through his playlists. There were more, so many more. Late nights, just us, her favorite, each one filled with romantic songs we had never listened to together. And they were all created around the times when he told me he was working late or going out with friends. My heart sank as a realization began to creep over me. These weren't just playlists for us. They were for someone else. Greg came home later that evening, whistling as he walked through the door, dropping his keys on the kitchen counter like it was just another day. I was sitting at the dining table, my mind still reeling from what I'd uncovered. "Hey," he said, walking into the kitchen. "How was your day?" I didn't respond right away. My mind was racing with how to even bring this up. Was I going to sound crazy? How do you accuse your husband of cheating because of a playlist? But there was too much there. Too many signs, too many late nights where he'd come home smelling like a different cologne. "Greg," I finally said, my voice shaky, "can we talk?" He froze in the middle of opening the fridge, turning to look at me. Sure, what's up? His voice was casual, too casual, like he had no idea what was coming. I stood up and grabbed my phone from the table, holding it in front of me like evidence. I listened to the playlist you made for the trip. Greg's face didn't change at first. He raised an eyebrow, confused. Okay, what about it? There were some weird songs on there. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. Songs about secrets, sneaking around affairs. His expression shifted slightly, but he still didn't look alarmed. I mean, it's just music. Not every song has to mean something, Jess. I nodded, trying to stay calm. Sure, but when I checked the other playlists you've made, they're all the same. Late nights, just us, her favorite. Who's Emily? That was when his face went pale. He opened his mouth to say something but quickly shut it, his eyes darting around the room like he was searching for an escape route. There was a long, uncomfortable silence. The kind of silence that gives you an answer before any words are spoken. Jess, it's not what you think, he finally said, but his voice had lost its confidence. He was panicking now, trying to figure out how much I knew. Emily is just a friend. Really? I crossed my arms, staring him down. A friend you send romantic playlists to? A friend you've been sneaking around with while telling me you're at work? He had no response. He just stood there, speechless, his guilt written all over his face. You've been lying to me, I said quietly, more to myself than to him. All this time, you've been lying. I'm sorry, Greg whispered, his voice breaking. I didn't mean for it to happen like this, but it didn't matter anymore. The damage was done. The weekend getaway we had planned was canceled, and instead, we spent the following days arguing, crying, and deciding what came next. Greg tried to make excuses, saying it was a mistake, that he never meant to hurt me. But the truth was, he had been living a double life, and Spotify was the thing that exposed it. We're in the process of separating now. I've moved out, and every time I hear music, I can't help but feel sick to my stomach. It's weird, the way something as simple as a playlist, something that used to bring us together, became the thing that tore us apart. Update, I got arrested. I genuinely didn't think I'd ever write an update to this story. After I found out my husband, Greg, was cheating on me through a random Spotify playlist, I thought that was the end of the nightmare. I was wrong. Things took a turn I never could have predicted, and I've learned that life has a twisted way of surprising you when you least expect it. To catch you up, after discovering Greg's affair with Emily, the woman he'd been making all those secret playlists for, I decided to leave him. I moved in with my sister while we started the separation process, trying to keep things as civil as possible. I figured the worst was behind me. I wasn't going to waste any more energy on Greg or his lies. I told myself I'd focus on moving forward and rebuilding my life. But of course, life had other plans. It had been about 2 weeks since I'd left Greg when I heard from a mutual friend that Emily had practically moved into our house. That hit me harder than I expected. I shouldn't have cared. I knew Greg was trash, and Emily? Well, she was just as bad for getting involved with a married man. But hearing that she was living in the house that I had made into a home, the place where we built our life together, that felt like a punch to the gut. Still, I kept my cool, at least outwardly. I wasn't going to give Greg or Emily the satisfaction of seeing me angry or hurt. I had my lawyer, and I was focusing on getting everything I needed to move on with my life. But last Friday, something happened that completely blew up my plan to stay composed. I was driving by the house, our asterisk house, on my way to pick up the last of my things. I had been putting it off because, honestly, the thought of going back there made me sick. But it had to be done. I pulled up, and there it was. Emily's car parked right in the driveway like she had always belonged there. My stomach flipped. It felt surreal, like I was living in some bad soap opera. I had a decision to make in that moment. I could drive away, keep my head high, and finish packing my things later. Or I could confront the woman who had wrecked my marriage. The rational part of me said to leave, but something else, something raw and angry, told me to stay. I wanted to see her. I wanted to look her in the eye and make her understand the damage she'd done. Before I even got to the door, I heard them, Greg and Emily, arguing inside. At first, it was just muffled shouting, But as I got closer, I could hear every word. They were really going at it. Emily was furious, screaming about how Greg had promised he'd leave me long before things got messy. She was yelling about how she wasn't going to be his side piece forever. I stopped in my tracks, frozen outside the door, listening to the chaos. A part of me wanted to laugh at the irony. Here she was, the woman who broke up my marriage, upset because Greg wasn't fully committing to her? How predictable. Greg's voice was loud and defensive. I told you it's complicated, Emily. We're in the middle of a divorce. These things take time. Bullshit, she screamed. You're dragging your feet. You still have feelings for her, don't you? Hearing that stung, but I stayed quiet. I didn't need to step in. They were tearing each other apart without any help from me. The door suddenly flew open, and Emily stormed out, tears streaking her face. She didn't notice me standing on the sidewalk until I spoke. Emily, right? She spun around, her eyes wide with shock. For a second, I thought she might just run to her car, but instead, she squared up, glaring at me like I was the last person on earth she wanted to see, which I guess I was. What do you want? She spat, her voice sharp and venomous. I stayed calm, folding my arms across my chest. Just wanted to see who I lost my marriage to. That was all it took to set her off. Her face flushed with anger, and she marched straight toward me. You think this is my fault? You think I wanted this? Greg told me he was done with you. He said he was leaving you before we even got involved. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. Really? So you just happened to start sleeping with him while he was still married to me? You didn't think to check if he was actually leaving? She clenched her fists at her sides, her whole body shaking with rage. You don't know anything, she screamed. He's been lying to both of us. Maybe, I said, still eerily calm. But you're the one who decided to get involved with a married man. So yeah, some of this is your fault. That's when things went from bad to worse. Emily lost it. She shoved me hard. I stumbled back, nearly losing my balance, but something in me snapped. I wasn't gonna let her put her hands on me and walk away like nothing happened. I shoved her right back, yelling, "Don't you dare touch me!" And then, everything went to hell. Emily lunged at me, fists flying, and I barely had time to react. She slapped me across the face, and I saw red. Instinct took over, and before I knew it, we were in a full-on brawl. Grabbing, shoving, hair-pulling. It was messy, ugly, and vicious. The sound of our fight echoed through the neighborhood, and I vaguely remember hearing someone shouting, but I was too caught up in the moment to care. Greg burst out of the house a minute later, his eyes wide with shock. "What the hell is going on?" he shouted, rushing over to pull Emily off of me. She was hysterical, screaming at both of us now, her hands clawing the air like she wanted to tear us apart. I was breathing heavily, my face stinging from where she'd slapped me, but I wasn't backing down. "Are you two insane?" Greg yelled, trying to hold Emily back. "Stop it!" But the fight wasn't over. I took a step toward her, ready to get in one last word, when I heard something that stopped me cold. Sirens. My heart dropped. A neighbor must have called the cops, probably scared that the fight was getting out of control. I looked around, seeing a few people peeking out from their windows, clearly enjoying the drama unfolding on their quiet street. A police car pulled up, and 2 officers got out, looking at the scene with a mix of exasperation and disbelief. One of them stepped forward, putting a hand between Emily and me. "Everyone needs to calm down," he shouted. Emily was still crying, her voice hoarse from screaming, while I was just trying to catch my breath. Greg stood off to the side, hands on his head, like he couldn't believe what had just happened. The officers separated us, taking statements. I told them what happened, how Emily had attacked me first, how I had only defended myself. Emily, of course, spun her own version of the story, painting herself as the victim. Greg, he just stood there, silent, watching the whole thing unfold. After what felt like forever, one of the officers turned to me. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but you admitted to fighting back. We have to take you in for assault." I stared at him, completely dumbfounded. Are you kidding me? She attacked me. The officer shook his head, clearly not happy about it. I understand, but since it turned physical on both sides, we have to take someone in. I felt like I was in a nightmare. Next thing I knew, I was being handcuffed and led to the police car while Emily stood there, watching me with a smirk on her tear-streaked face. Greg tried to say something to me as I was being put in the back seat, but I cut him off with a glare. I was done with him. I spent the next few hours in jail, sitting in a cold, gray holding cell, replaying everything in my head. I couldn't believe this was my life, that I was sitting there because of a cheating husband and his unhinged mistress. By the time I was released, I had made up my mind. I blocked Greg on everything: phone, social media, email. I didn't care that we were still technically married. I was done. I contacted my lawyer the next morning and told him I wanted the divorce fast-tracked. No more delays, no more chances for Greg to drag this out. I wanted him and Emily out of my life permanently. The irony? I found out later that Emily dumped Greg not long after the fight. She couldn't handle the mess that came with him. *** mess. So in the end, Greg lost both of us. And honestly, he deserves it.